Hey everyone, my name is Lizzie and today we'll be talking about my coffee wash or coffee wine. So I've seen multiple videos on YouTube transforming coffee into wine. I thought I was the only one, but no. And I've watched these videos after I started the coffee wine making for myself. So before I watched these videos, spoiler alert, it didn't work. So we have multiple culprits here. It was either because of the hot temperature, either because of coffee itself, or because of the milk. First of all, before talking about that in detail, how do I know it doesn't work? It's because when I put in all my ingredients together inside the fermenting jar, added the yeast, there was no bubbling. And having no bubbling on day one is okay, but I waited 1, 2, 3 days, and after the third day, there was still no bubbling. And in order to troubleshoot it, I would put it inside a warm room and put the heating up just to make sure that the yeast is active. And even after leaving it in there for 7 hours in this hot room, no bubbling. Therefore, there's not more activating the yeast than that. So either the yeast is dead or there's something acting against it. But the main factor to make alcohol here is the yeast. So something's definitely up with the yeast because there was plenty of sugar. I added coffee grains, sugar, water, and the yeast was not eating the sugar. So why do I think it could be? Because it was too hot. I finished the recipe, and once I put it in the fermenting jar, I didn't leave it any time for it to cool off. I just put the yeast in right away, and usually I do leave a few minutes of airing it out just to make sure that the temperature cools down a bit. And just to be honest, I got too cocky. I was telling myself I've done this a bunch of times. Who needs to have exact temperature? In this case, I did not measure the heat of the wash, and usually I use a baby thermometer, and the link is in the description below if you'd like to purchase one. And this baby thermometer lets me know if the temperature is right to push in the yeast. So what do we know what's the right temperature? Each yeast has a different optimal temperature, and the one that I use, the EC1118, activates in an optimal temperature of 30 to 35 degrees Celsius. So depending on the yeast that you use, this can be 20 to 25, this could be 25 degrees Celsius. It could be hotter or colder depending on the yeast strain that you're using. And I'm using wine yeast because I prefer the taste. I prefer that than turbo yeast, daddy yeast, or any type of yeast so far, but I'm open to other yeast suggestions if you have any. So going back to our coffee wash, I actually used a yeast starter this time, and I felt that it was too hot. Once I put everything together, closed the lid, there was no bubbling. It was at the back of my mind that I really should have used that baby thermometer to measure the temperature of my wash. So that's the first option of why it didn't work. Second one was coffee. So I did a little research after, and note to self, do research before you do the experiments. I tend to just do the experiment right away, and if it doesn't work, that's when I look, is this ingredient actually compatible with the yeast? For example, Coke or sodas. I found out after my experiment that the preservatives were a yeast inhibitor. And similarly, I Googled coffee grains and yeast, and honestly, it's a big confusing pot out there on the internet. Some sources say that it slows down yeast growth, but not too many. There was maybe one source saying that, and all the rest were just curious about how the final product would end up. Would it be bitter? Would it work? Further into my search, and that's where I went on YouTube and saw that there are a lot of different coffee wine experiments, so it must work. Same thing if I have to go back to the preservatives. I've only seen one video on how someone was able to make sodas into alcohol, but there was a ton of comments on the preservatives not working on yeast. In this case, the difference between sodas and coffee is that there were not many comments about how coffee grains are inhibiting to yeast. So general idea is that it works there. In that case, my batch is the one with the problem. And I initially thought it was the coffee beans, but after looking online and seeing that it's possible, I might go for the third option. And by the way, when we're talking about coffee in alcohol, this is not to have the coffee flavor up front. It would be more of a underlying tone at the end, because flavoring, if you want to make it pungent, it's best to do the flavoring at the end of your fermentation by adding liquid extracts, for example, vanilla or caramel or coffee flavored liquids. And to not add powder, because if you add powder when you're flavoring, the powder interferes with the liquid and you see the little particles and you even taste it when you take a sip. Either that, if they're floating in the air, or if the powder sinks to the bottom, you see a layer of the powder at the end, which is not that appealing. And if you'd like more tips on how to flavor, we have a lot of different tips and tricks in our classes that you can book in the link below. We teach you how to make alcohol from scratch. It's a step-by-step process, and we guide you from the beginning to the end of the fermentation process. You can ask questions, it's interactive, and I really recommend it to you if you want to know what alcohol is made of, and if you want to be in a fun environment that helps you learn about this drink. So the first culprit was the yeast being too hot, and based on my search online, this is what I found on what temperature kills off the yeast. The second culprit could have been the coffee beans. After watching the videos, I see, oh, my coffee wash just bubbled. I have it near me. The second option, which is coffee, I saw that a lot of people who have experimented with this did cold brew, meaning they didn't boil their coffee beans. They just diluted it in warm water because it improves the taste. And they've added lime to offset the bitterness. But I didn't even reach that step yet. And I would have to verify what the pH of coffee is, because by adding lime, you don't want your pH to go too low, or else this is unfavorable for the yeast. So when adding lime to improve the flavor, it's best to add just a few dashes, not the full lemon. And about this culprit being coffee, I used the Keurig packs. So it's not instant coffee, but it's granulated coffee beans. And I saw that some others used instant coffee. Does that make a difference? I wouldn't see why, because they're pretty much the same. It's just one is stronger. However, beans, granules, or instant coffee should yield the same result. And the third culprit that could have ruined my fermentation is milk. So this was an innocent thought. I thought when people bake, they use yeast, they use sugar, and they use milk. When they make bread, when they make cookies, yeast, milk is always in the picture. So why not add it to my coffee wash? And what I wanted to do by adding milk is just lighten up the color of the alcohol, because the coffee wash was a bit on the dark side. So I wanted to brighten it up a bit. And well, we were talking about yeast earlier having an optimal temperature of 30 to 35 degrees Celsius, but contrarily, milk's optimal temperature is in the fridge. We're talking about different temperatures completely, and when milk is kept at room temperature or higher for long periods of time, usually 4 hours or more, they get spoiled, rotten. And not only that, is that we're leaving this wash or coffee washes out not only for 4 hours, but up to 4 weeks. It could even go longer depending on how you like your final product to taste like. So I soon after thought, why did I add milk? Therefore, if I want to fix this batch, I can either pitch in new yeast. So the yeast that were killed off earlier, if it was too hot, I'll just pitch in new yeast and it's gonna work. I can stir it, put it in a warm temperature to make sure it's active. But since I added milk, I can no longer do that because it's probable that the liquid in there is rotten. We have these, actually, let me show you what it looks like. And today, if you look at it, we have a bunch of bubbles at the top and yeast at the bottom. It just doesn't look pretty. Actually, let's grab it for you. This is what it looks like. Now I see that it's fermenting, so it's a little late because I already added milk, which spoiled that whole thing. So had I not added milk, it would have been working. And I could have saved it by either adding more yeast or just leaving it as it is. And the only thing that happened in between the non-bubbling part and now that it's bubbling is that I stirred the pot. So sometimes you need to stir the pot just to activate the yeast, and do not add milk. Please do not add milk. Do not add anything that can go bad in room temperature. So anything dairy, you don't want to add that to your alcohol. And I was wondering, why was there never any alcoholized milk home brewing products? But that's why. And I also have to figure out, does spoiled milk become cheese or does it become yogurt? If you're a dairy connoisseur, drop a comment below and let me know, does expired milk become cheese or yogurt? Anyways, I'd have to verify that another day. And if you found this video valuable, share it with a friend, and don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.